Hello, everyone. Welcome to the June 24th, 2025 SIG Node meeting. First up today, we have Kevin.
All right, sorry, give me a sec. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
All right, so I've been I guess there's been a Slack chat going around a little bit about kind of the next steps for in-place pod vertical scaling. And there's kind of two components in here. Like, as we all know, like in-place pod vertical scaling is beta, and then our hope will be that workloads like job, deployment, stateful set could potentially resize pods. Right now, I think we kind of assume pod templates are immutable if a workload is using them. And so, I've been kind of thinking about how do we want to tackle this work going forward once, in-place pod resizing is I think beta on now. I had another use case that came up in my line of work where folks are interested and essentially be able to have, like, this is for a job, having the workload suspended, and they want to be able to patch the requests and limits of the workload, whether or not it's to, one example was to look at the workload and see whether or not you actually need all the GPUs you requested or not. But unfortunately, this is blocked by the job template or batch job force. It does not allow any changing of the pod templates, no matter if it's suspended or not. So I was just kind of like walking through, like, how do we approach this? And I mean, I wrote up a quick POC on at least step one of this, which is relaxing the immutability for container requests and limits while a job is suspended. But I'm wondering, I do want to know, like, what is our main plan for how workloads utilize in-place pod resizing, and whether or not, like, resizing when a job is suspended is in scope for this or not. And that's kind of what I was bringing up here. Probably spanning both SIG apps and SIG Node, but that's kind of it for me. Does anyone have any questions?
I think my hand next. So yeah, I think it's very reasonable and very timely to start looking into that. I think it's many people asking for that, like looking at in-place restart or in-place resize. People want to do like templates updates. I think my comment is, like, we need to understand, like, earlier we start on that, the easier it will be. Like, I think right now we have this limitation on in-place restart that I only noticed when looking at Dixie's PR, when we don't allow to resize init containers after they already run, which may not be very compatible with updating the templates. Like, I think you should be able to update init container size if you want to do like templates updates, because this way you are not like blocking updates for future executions, and you're updating every single instance of it, and future executions will align with what currently is running. So I think it may be useful to do that. But yeah, earlier we start looking into that and see what can be changed in how in-place resize works, better for us, I think.
Yeah, I guess maybe my question though also is whether or not, like, if a workload is like for a job, if it's suspended, do we want it to go through like a resize loop anyway, or is it kind of out of scope if the workload is not scheduled, and we can kind of tackle this as two different problems?
I don't have any concern to resize. It's just so many complex. I saw the team raise the hand.
Yeah. So So I don't know about jobs, but at least deployments and stateful sets are mutable, the pod template. And changing the spec is considered an update, and there's an update strategy that governs what to do in that case. So I think it's unclear, like, what am I trying to say here? If we allow in-place update of replicas, then I think we still need to give the user the option to not update in place. So in other words, if I say, yeah, I'm changing the requests, but actually I want to do a rolling update because I want to make sure that like this doesn't suddenly start crashing every replica. So I want to do it, yeah, rolling updates so I can keep track of which is which. I could even imagine wanting to do a rolling update of the in-place resizes as well. And so I think there's kind of two ways I could see approaching this. One is to kind of augment the upgrade strategy and say, if you do an update that only touches requests and limits, only touches the resizable resources, then it does some sort of in-place update. But that also gets weird because then if you do 2 updates in rapid succession, what is the behavior there? If you do an update if you accidentally update a non-resizable resource, and then we start doing this rolling upgrade when you meant to do an in-place upgrade. So I think there's a lot we need to consider about like what the right user experience is around that.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I almost feel it's kind of, I mean, it would be nice to have like a single cup for job deployment and stateful set, but I don't think that's reasonable just because like you're mentioning like upgrade strategies. I don't think job has a concept of that, while deployments and stateful sets have very different concepts there. I know deployments uses replica sets, while I don't think stateful sets do. And there's going to be like very different implementations for each of these. So I'm wondering, should we still kind of go on like a workload use case for each, and then, or do we want like an overall plan for all of them? Because like for job, I have more experience looking at that code than I do deployments or stateful sets. And I also know that, yeah, there's a lot more importance around upgrade strategies for those. And yeah, and that's kind of where I'm wondering, like, having this conversation, how we should go about it. And like, I can always we can always go to SIG apps also and kind of see like what the recommendation would be for how we would have this go forward.
I think from my perspective, it would be SIG apps driving force, like what user scenarios are, and from SIG Node we need to acquire requirements. Like I mentioned this init containers, but like there is another conversation saying, oh, we made this decision of making like non-breaking memory changes, and like we will decline memory changes if we cannot make it. But what does it mean for change of template? Maybe we need to have another API that is force in place resize, or like if it's failed, we in place and we fall back into like in place, and like controller needs to handle that. I think it all depends on user scenarios, and that eventually will get into requirements for SIG Node.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, that makes sense. I can set something up with SIG apps. I guess the one question I do want to know is, do we, like, if a workload for a job, if it's suspended, or there's a scheduling gate on a pod and it's not yet scheduled, do we still, like, is that technically fall in scope for an in-place pod resizing, or is that allowed, or that can be allowed without having to consider in-place pod resizing? Like, I'm thinking in-place pod resizing is when the pod is running, but if it's not scheduled yet, are we open to relaxing this immutability constraints? At least for job, I know it's forbidden. I don't know for stateful set or deployment. I don't think there's any way to like not, or there's no way to pause those. So
Kevin, I'm totally okay with relax those immutable part for the pod template. I don't have, of course, there's many of the corner cases we need to take care. And also I agree with Sergey, talk to the SIG app and understand the usability about those kind of things. But I personally think about when we talk about the in-place pod resizing, it's like the node functionality, right? So here is the pod haven't scheduled yet. And I basically think about that's the more like the controller, different controller, their decision. It's just more like the and patch or update about those kind of things to be scheduled at the planning phase or capability planning or whatever placement of the phase. So node basically we just support once the decision made, but it's not really in place, right? The place here is mean node. You already start here on the node already committed. Admin admit this request. So, and also we try to ensure of the running time, actual time, and all those kind of things is aligned with the user or like workload expected. So it's not really related to the in-place pod resizing. I just want to say that. In-place pod resizing, I'm just view as the mechanism node offered. And there's all kind of the controller, right? So like, for example, even Ray auto scaler could be leverage these of the things. So there's the many other controller can to do to leverage of this feature node offered. Yeah.
yeah, I guess there was one suggestion on the POC I had about like RBAC for resizing and whether or not to limit this. And I was curious, like if in place, like I know in place pod resize has a resize resource. And I don't know if that, like, if we want to relax like immutability, if we consider that as a way to allow updates even if they're not scheduled. But it sounds like we're drawing the line in the sand that in place pod resize is when a pod is actually scheduled and running, and this is kind of a separate problem, is what I'm hearing.
May not exactly running, but at least the node Kubernetes already admit this pod, right? So already accepted this pod. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll bring this up to SIGOps and we'll kind of see. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everyone.
I think one user scenario may be like if job instance, like a specific pod is keep failing with key, or like maybe you want to resize it in place instead of rescheduling. So that may be like one scenario for this in-place resize with jobs.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's definitely a lot of the use cases I think for in-place pod resize, like, I mean, we don't really want to encourage people submitting pods without a workload controller. So I think all the use cases for why in-place pod resize is useful applies to workloads in general. But I think there's a lot of subtlety among each workload. But yeah, I think I can at least start the conversation around job. I know that for job set and job, I can see a lot of use cases of why we want to relax this, even if a workload is not scheduled yet. So that's kind of why I'm thinking more about this one right now, at least for job. I don't know if I will make much effort on deployment or stateful set, but at least I'll start the conversation around job and we can see where it goes. All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Great, thank you, Kevin. I think the other one was just, I don't know if Itamar is here. I think he mostly wanted to broadcast conversation about all the next steps for GA for Swap. So yeah, if folks could take a look at that and we could clarify, that'd be great. Did anyone have any other items they wanted to talk about? AJ?
Hi, yes. I think that like I'm not sure like if someone else here. He created a placeholder clip, but I wasn't sure what are the things intended to cover. I added two improvements. I mean suggestions. One for auto labeling nodes with swap mode. Basically, this would be needed. My goal is to keep this for monitoring and also for targeted node isolation for the existing work we are all doing. I think that like the swap aware scheduling could have some intersection, but I think there are two different things. If the swap aware scheduling kept focuses on resources, I think that like this is different from the labeling what I'm doing, and I think that clarity needs to be present. And I also wanted to get general feedback on what are our thoughts on auto labeling within kubelet. Looks like there is precedent. I think I also discussed with Kevin on the Slack. Wanted to open up that conversation wider to see what others think on that. If a future new mode is to be introduced, and if we want to protect nodes with taints, I think that selection of group of nodes with swap enable will be necessary. And I agree that like NFT captures swap label, but that is basically capturing whether swap is configured on the node. This is different from the kubelet configuration or what mode it is present. That's how I see it as different. Sorry, I see more hands up. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, I guess my main reason, yeah, so I think the comment you were bringing up was like you were talking about adding a new like label for swap and it like has it. And I think some people brought up that there's already a label for NFT. And I guess why I'm bringing this up is we are missing a lot of labels on nodes for scheduling decisions in general, and we kind of delegate that to NFT or the GPU operator version of that for labeling GPUs. And you could argue, I mean, swap is a node specific one, but there are a lot of missing node labels for scheduling decisions that I don't know if it makes sense to include them in upstream Kubernetes. And that's kind of why with swap, I don't know. I still think that NFT is fine for this. And I don't know if we want to add more of that information to entry for this. That's kind of what my opinion was, but I'm happy to be swayed elsewhere.
I get the NFT suggestion, but I think that's not, we don't see that as a standard inclusion in all Kubernetes distros, right? I mean, GKE doesn't deploy NFT by default, or it's basically advocating users to basically like, if you want to use swap, you should use NFT. Is that what we, like, I don't know, like kind of suggest? That doesn't seem like for a fundamental feature like swap, like a good, I think like good way to proceed, right?
And Francesco, I'll let him to go. He has more leeway here.
Yeah. So I agree that NFD should be still in the picture, but I would like to argue that there are some features which could very much map to labels that pertain to core, like for example swap support. So as general attitude, my own thinking is that it feels weird to have a core attribute exposed through a third-party component. My own opinion is that Kubernetes core should be self-sufficient, and external labels, like for example, well, the very first thing that comes to mind is that the CPU attributes, which is a very common use case for an NFD operator, fair enough, they could be very much delegated to the NFD. But at this point in time, my own take is some things, including swap, they map more closely towards like, architecture or operating system, which are labels Kubernetes itself manages. So, as general stance, this is my thinking. There is room for both solution. It's just in very big quotes about where we draw the line.
Yeah, I feel like the existence of the node capability cap, which obviously didn't make it progress in 134, but generally, like, I think does present an opportunity to think about. I mean, I think that there are other cases that we want behavior like this in tree, because having smarter scheduling is just it seems to be generally desirable. So it seems like something like this is desirable.
I also want to just touch on that. I agree that like node capability seems like we are expressing nodes inherent, specific capabilities and features for scheduling specific details. I think we are still discussing on what counts as capability. I added comments on introducing swap into a node capability. I think that we had some disagreement over there. We'll probably have to discuss more on what is a capability and what is not. But my thinking on node label is that it's not just on scheduling improvement. Like if you want to add like a taint, I think that like the targeted selection of nodes that are swap enabled is useful, and also for future migration, as we are discussing more modes for swap, then like a grouping of nodes based on label is the right approach in Kubernetes. That's my interest in adding it as a label, not just for scheduling, but for more use cases at present.
Yeah, I think Mehan, I believe that we have many concepts that needs to be exposed in an API server so we can do better scheduling decisions. I'm really afraid of having catch-all solutions and like one-off solutions as well. Like catch-all being like capabilities when you just expose a string and then like deal with that later when you want, instead of string, you want like complex object, and this object will have many properties that need to be accounted for. In case of swap is a similar thing for me. Like I feel like for swap, we don't know what exactly customer want, like label or taint or like something else for scheduling. And for any other scenario, like we need to have some comprehensive story. Like what is, do we have to separate nodes by like types of swap? Like do we need to like limited swap label and like non-limited swap label? Or we want to them coexist, and then we have different way to tell which pod needs which kind of swap, and then pods will be scheduled specifically, and it will be strongly typed fields in a pod spec that will help us decide what is the best scheduling decision for this pod. I think having labels is like very easy first step, but it complicates the future. And I think it may be more beneficial to discuss what the future holds. And then like if some short-term decision needs to be made on vendor side or like NFD side, we can live with that. But then core Kubernetes will move on into specialized solution for each of those advanced resources.
AJ.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. So I think that like adding label doesn't change anything on the core Kubernetes architecture on the nodes being already scheduled that way, right? There are labels can be manually added if we later introduce API level scheduling and users still want to use labeling basis selection. That's fine. I think like we shouldn't be limiting how the user wants to use a certain feature in one way. And again, like I said, I don't see this as short-term solution for scheduling. I think that like the general usability for label is wider than scheduling. And I think that like when you discuss like pod level spec, we are exploring API. That's for wider gains, not specifically on scheduling, right? I think that like label stands still in parallel with the API level aspects, I would think. But yeah, I agree. Like we should also explore the API, but I don't see that is conflicting with the label inclusion.
I don't know what the next section. Should we discuss it offline? Yep.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks. Okay.
And thank you for bringing it up, AJ. Cool. Are there any other topics you want to discuss? Great. Thank you everyone for joining.
Yeah, I think
Talk to you later.
next week we may need to cancel.
Yeah, totally. That's actually a good point. Yeah, we can cancel for next week and then just plan on meeting in 2 weeks. All right. Talk to you later. Thank you.
Take care.